The following stories come from the Flying Saucer Review, Volume 1, Number 10. Landings reported in Indiana and California. Reported landings continue to pour in. On the evening of August 26, 5 days after the Hopkinsville, Kentucky landing, a flying saucer which landed near a house and left half-circle impression on the ground was reported by 2 women witnesses from Bedford, Indiana. On the afternoon of the incident, the 2 women had been in Bedford, and when they returned home about 8:30 p.m., they said a huge white saucer was hovering at the center of the home of one of the women. The woman said that the saucer, larger than an ordinary room in a house, had a black streak down the center and seemed to contract and expand with regularity, caused by pulsating glow around saucer, and as it did so, the lights left on in the house appeared to dim. This dimming of the lights could have been caused by the electromagnetic field around the saucer. The women became frightened, and they drove back to Bedford without approaching the saucer closer than the front gate. They waited for their husbands in Bedford, and then they all returned to the house later in the night. By the time the men and women had reached the house, the object had disappeared. Early the next morning, the 2 women witnesses and their husbands investigated the area and found a number of impressions on the earth, each the shape of a half circle. The impressions, they said, were about 1/4 of an inch deep. A squadron of red, blue, orange, and silver flying saucers landed at Riverside, California, southwest of Los Angeles on August 29th. The entire incident was witnessed by a dozen Casa Blanca youngsters. At least 2 of the youngsters were paralyzed briefly by flashing lights aimed at them from the saucers, which were as big as a house. One of the boys was climbing a tree when the first saucer arrived. He said that something silver flashed from the saucer and that he was transferred from the tree to the top of a house. I was then floated from the housetop to the ground. Another youngster swore they saw this boy leave the roof and come straight down, landing on his head. He was unhurt. The incident took place about 3:15 p.m. At 5 p.m., the area was still in an uproar. One woman said that the youngsters, who had been playing along the street, suddenly broke into shouts, screams, yells, and floods of tears as the first flying saucer landed in a nearby field. One youngster reportedly ran and jumped on his mother so hard that he nearly knocked her to the ground, hiding her face against her in fear. Nearly 2 hours after the little men arrived in their flying saucers, one of the littlest boys still was crying. One youngster, a 13-year-old girl, said that many of the children saw the saucers at about the same time, but that she was the first to see them. The youngsters were unanimously in agreement when they said the saucers were spherical-shaped and of different colors. One of the boys said he saw a man about 3.5 feet tall get out of one of the saucers. Another boy said he saw a man with a funny costume and that he had 2 weapons of some kind that paralyzed 2 of the boys. One witness said that the saucers sort of spiraled down, and when they took off, they pulled up off the ground and then disappeared with a whirling motion. The average adult mind will not accept this story, not because it sounds incredible or impossible, simply because the entire incident was witnessed by a group of children. Simply children's imagination. The silent group will scream. Imagination? Comic book fatigue? Too much television? Nuts. Those youngsters know what they saw. If the same story had come from some of the top brass in Washington, D.C., who would disbelieve it? No one. Why? Simply because it came from someone special. To say these youngsters did not see what they said they saw would be sheer ignorance. Hundred Sea Saucer. On September 29th, 1955, about 7 o'clock in the morning, I got a phone call from a local citizen who was very skeptical when it came to flying saucers. His attitude toward the saucers had suddenly changed. He informed me that he and 2 other witnesses had sighted a terrifying object over Corpus Christi, Texas, on the night of September 28th at about 8:57. He told me that shortly before the sighting, he had been ridiculing saucer believers in a conversation with some friends. The excitement caused by the sightings affected him so that he shook like a leaf for several hours after. All observers reported that the object was absolutely tremendous in size. They reported that the center of the object was orange and had a brilliant green around the outer rim, with heat or flames leaping from the outer edges. The skeptic who saw the object said it couldn't possibly have been a meteorite of any kind, shape, or form. One of the witnesses made a quick phone call to the nearby naval base to report the sighting. The skeptic called the base about a half hour later. He talked to the officer on duty at the time, and the officer told him that dozens of people were calling to report the strange object. He said that they had sent planes into the area. The witness reported that the officer was practically in a state of hysterical fright. Soon after the call to the naval base, many planes were sighted in the area. The following day, I called the local newspaper and asked how many people had reported the strange object the night before. They told me that about 250 people had called to report the object. An article did not appear in the paper. Next, I called the naval base to see what information they would give me concerning the object. The officer in charge said that not a single person had called. He went on to say that there was no strange objects in the sky the night before, and if there had been, I would have known about it. I'm the first person that would have been notified if such a report had been received, he said. He went on to say that we didn't receive one phone call, and as far as the Navy is concerned, we will take no further action. A woman witness reported to me that her 4 children and one of their friends had sighted the object. She said the children were out in the yard and that they kept shouting, "Flying saucer, flying saucer." This lasted for nearly 2 minutes. She said she didn't go outside right away because she thought the children were playing spaceman. When I told her what the officer at the naval base said, she replied, "I know they're not telling the truth. When I finally went outside to see what all the excitement was about, I saw a whole fleet of planes go to the area and search for the object." She said that at about the same time the planes were searching the area, searchlights came on at the base and began piercing the sky where the object had disappeared. Here we have another major saucer sighting witnessed by hundreds of people. 250 witnesses called the local newspaper and report what they have seen. The newspaper does not print the news of the sightings. About the same number of witnesses called the nearby naval base. The next day, the officer in charge at the base denies that any calls had been received and denies that planes had been sent into the area. It seems as if they are afraid of something. What? Formation of glowing lights. On September 24th, 1955, I was traveling east on Highway US 10, about 2 miles west of Old Elm, Washington. There were 2 other passengers in the car, one in the front seat and one in the back seat. It was a beautiful night, not a cloud in the sky. It was about 9:11 p.m. when it happened. We were just coming over a rise in the highway when I saw it. Coming straight down the highway, heading west, not more than 1,000 feet in the air, was a cluster of white lights flying in a V formation. The passenger sitting next to me was looking out the window to her right when I first saw the lights. I said, "Look," to get her attention, but about the same time she turned her head, the cluster of lights had reached our car and suddenly made a 90-degree left turn right in front of us. Before the passenger in the back seat could look out the window, the formation had disappeared. The formation seemed to be following a group of cars on the highway heading west, and when we approached the area heading east, they changed direction and shot out of sight. I stopped the car and got out, but the formation was gone. The incident shook me up so bad it was all I could do to continue driving the car. It was the most incredible thing I have ever seen. There was no outline to the objects. All that was visible was a formation of glowing lights which gave off an ivory white color. And to top it off, they gave off no sound. They were only visible for about 5 seconds, so I'm not sure how many objects there were in the formation. Objects sighted at Otter Tail Lake, Minnesota, believed to be flying saucer. With the thought of being ridiculed by friends and accused of suffering from hallucination, a summer resident of Otter Tail Lake and his guest have kept silent on a story which may or may not have importance. The story, loaded with interest, is released by the parties with the understanding names will be withheld. The story started out like this. While the resident and his guest were returning to the cottage from a fishing trip on Otter Tail Lake, their attention, for some unknown reason, was attracted skyward, and they sighted a brilliant object suspended in the sky. As they came along in the boat, they continued to watch the object, and jokingly remarked, "They won't believe us, but we can say that on this night, at 12 minutes to 8, July 14th, 1955, we sighted our first flying saucer." About 15 minutes later, when they docked their boat, the object was still visible, but had moved to a different quadrant. Calling to his family, the resident told one of his children to get his binoculars as he wanted to get a better look at it. The entire group watched it for another possible 15 or 20 minutes. In explaining the saucer, they state it appeared to be somewhat like an elongated balloon squashed together and seemed to be standing perpendicular. When it was first sighted, it was about 75 or 80 degrees to the east and later moved into the south quadrant. Whatever it wasn't affected by wind currents, for clouds moved around it, and there was no drift to it. It just stood still, says one of the men. With the aid of the binoculars, they could make out what appeared to be a row of windows or portholes along the side of the object, something like a train coach. On what they thought was the underside was a V, which appeared to run from about the center off to the front. It was whitish, is the way the color was explained. Maybe something like aluminum in the bright evening sun, but it was so bright it was hard to tell. It just looked whitish, is the best way to explain it. The object was estimated to have been at a height of about 25,000 feet, as near as they could determine from the cloud structure, and it appeared to be about half the size of the moon. When the object started its departure, they said it moved from the south slightly to the east, against the direction in which the clouds were moving, and then in a sort of sweeping arc started its perpendicular climb and disappeared into the south, passing through two thin layers of clouds, said one of the witnesses. I have never discontinued the possibility of flying saucers, but I was always in hopes I could see one to verify it in my own mind, and now I can. And then went on, I can't help but feel it was somebody up there making an observation, for it stayed there for so long. UFO over Stillwater, Oklahoma. An unidentified flying object was seen hovering in the sky over Stillwater about 7 p.m. on September 12th. Descriptions of the object range from a dark object the size of an airplane to a brilliant orange object about 3 times the size of a star. First reports had the object traveling in a southeast, but later extended observations of the object put the direction of travel in a general eastern direction. At least one group of persons kept the object under observation for more than 30 minutes. One witness described the object as a sphere apparently in 2 parts. The upper part was a brilliant orange color, with the lower part, suspended from the object, a blue-green color. He said the object appeared to be traveling at a very high rate of speed and that it was ascending rapidly. That same evening, a bright, shiny object floated across the skies south of Riverside, California, the scene of a reported landing on August 29th. Officials at the March Air Force Base, southeast of Riverside, said it was a weather balloon. Some of the witnesses to the sighting can't agree with the Air Force. One watched the object through an 8-powered telescope and reported it was triangular in shape. It looked like 3 round objects grouped together, but couldn't tell what it was. Another witness, who said he had been investigating spacecraft for over 2 years, used a 40-power scope and reported that it looked like a parachute with a long string hanging down. He said that on September 7th, he saw another object in the same area and that it was definitely a spaceship. Still, another witness reported that the object appeared to be moving back and forth, and that it appeared to have rings around it, like Saturn. After dark, when the object was no longer visible, several witnesses reported colored lights flashing across the sky. The following day, a pair of mysteries, one an unexplained blast, and the other a thing in the sky, had Riversiders wondering. The blast, which rocked homes and rattled windows throughout the city as well as in neighboring communities. Why? It was a weather balloon and a jet breaking the sound barrier, says the Air Force. Thank you for listening to this video. I hope you liked it. If you want more of these videos, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to me. If you have your own scary story to share, please leave it in the comment or go to my Reddit page, r/ihaveaspookystory. Maybe your story will be in the next video. Good night, sleep tight, and don't let the shadows bite.